We are going to smash the forces that are suffocating us, and we are going to find the answers to why technology is going to work for us and we're not going to work for it, for why we can have a clean energy transition that lowers cost for people instead of being trapped in these high energy costs in a fossil fuel economy, that is, it can have a safety net that's not just about protecting these old programs, but we need a new safety net that works for the way in which people live and work in the 21st century, right? So I think the message has to be about both like breaking through these forces that are like crushing us, but reclaiming the idea that there's a new frontier.
I'm Jon Favreau, and you just heard from the one and only Ben Rhodes, Pod Save the World co-host, New York Times bestselling author, and my Obama speechwriting partner in crime for about 6 years. Ben spent a lot of time thinking and writing about the impact that the internet and social media have had on democracies and autocracies, and he always has something smart to say that's usually grounded in the experience he has talking to activists and political leaders all over the world. Somehow, he's also found the time to add the occasional New York Times column to his prodigious content output. And his latest is about yet another problem that's been made worse by phones and feeds. It's titled, How Short-Term Thinking is Destroying America. He writes, Donald Trump's rise depended on the marriage of unbridled capitalism and unregulated technology, which allowed social media to systematically demolish our attention spans and experience of shared reality. Trump declares victory. The camera focuses on the next shiny object. Negative consequences can be obfuscated today, blamed on others tomorrow. We are all living in the disorienting present, swept along by currents we don't control. A perfect conversation piece for this show, and Ben and I covered it all, including how we got here, how we get out of this disorienting present, and what's required of the Democratic Party to help make it happen. It's the type of conversation Ben and I have had almost every day for years now. So we figured we'd do it in front of the mics for anyone who wants to listen. Here's Ben Rhodes. Ben, what's up?
Hey.
It's good to have you on.
It's great to be here.
It's wild that this
Long time, first time.
I was going to say, it's wild this is your first time, considering you and I talk about the themes of this show on a daily basis.
Yes.
And you've also written several books that delve into the impact of social media and the internet on democracy, which is a big thing we talk about here.
Yes.
But we finally found a great hook, which is your most recent New York Times piece on how short-term thinking is destroying America. What inspired the piece?
Two things inspired the piece. I was on a vacation, a rare vacation for me. And during this vacation, the big, beautiful bill passed. And the United States bombed Iran, which I don't even really get into in the piece, but it got me thinking that, because my brain started to churn, and the big, beautiful bill, it's obvious, right? Like we are, giving trillions of dollars away to people right now to kind of juice rich people and the stock market while saddling, our future generations with tremendous deficits and debt. And also like, we can talk about this, but probably putting at risk the dollar being the world's reserve currency, all these things. But then bombing Iran, I kind of watched the predictable news cycle reaction to this of like, did we obliterate the sites or did we just damage the sites? And no consideration as to whether this is a smart long-term move, right? Whether this incentivizes Iranians to get a nuclear weapon someday, whether every other country in the world that might think about getting a nuclear weapon is like, the way to not get bombed is to get a nuclear weapon. And the complete absence of that perspective, never mind the question that we had a pretty successful coup in Iran back in 1954. And lo and behold, it led to this Iranian revolution that produced this Iranian government. So I started to think about how short-term American thinking has gotten, both in terms of policy and in terms of politics and news cycle, right? And then I was thinking about the fact that I'd gone to a screening for Eddington. And
my favorite movie of the year.
And I know you've covered this, talked about it, but in Eddington is the ultimate example of Americans who are just completely living in their phones to the point that they just can't even consider that the things that they're doing are, potentially destroying their future. And at this screening, the director was there, Ari Aster was there. And the data center image, right? So while these people are destroying this town, destroying their own lives because of QAnon, because of Black Lives Matter, because of all these different conspiracy theories online, in the backdrop, there's just a data center that's getting built. And that's all that really matters. And I went up to him after and I said, it was such a powerful image to me because it summed up this short-term, long-term thing, right? That we're, because of social media, because of the internet, because of Donald Trump, because of all these reasons, we can barely think past tomorrow. And yet there are these mega forces, whether it's climate change or AI or the kind of dissolution of the global order, that are actually going to determine the long-term future. And so that was like the jumping off point to me of like, I want to unpack this in a piece for this kind of monthly column I for the Times.
And I'm sure he told you, because he told me here that it was very intentional. Like that's exactly how he was thinking.
Yeah.
When he chose the data center as sort of this like background thing that like people weren't really talking about, was just like, but it went through the movie.
Yeah.
So it is funny too, you mentioned bombing Iran, because like even the simplistic question of, did we obliterate it? Did we not? That was like a controversy for a couple days. And there were a couple reports. Yeah. And I'm like, did we obliterate? I don't even know. It was like, I feel like in this Trump term, the episodes of America are getting even shorter than they used to be, which I guess is fitting because no one watches long anything anymore.
Yeah.
But it does feel like we're just moving on to the next thing. Nothing can, like, we can't hold on to anything for more than a couple news cycles.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why this is like a great offline topic, right? Because some of this is a Trump or policy critique, right? Like we don't plan for the future anymore, right? We're not planning for AI. How are we going to regulate that? How are we going to protect our economy and jobs against that? How are we going to protect our security against that? We kind of gave up on climate change. Like even Democrats barely talk about it anymore. Like we kind of gave up on these long-term issues. But what was interesting in writing the piece and connecting it to Eddington at the beginning was realizing it's much, much bigger than a political problem. Mm-hmm. It is a societal and cultural problem too. And our brains have literally been reprogrammed to think about the next post or the next thing I see on my phone, and that you can be completely consumed with the question of whether Iran's nuclear sites were obliterated or not for like 2 days. And then when the algorithm just stops feeding you anything about that and Trump stops talking about it, it's like it never happened. It just kind of gets memory hold somewhere. But guess what? In the real world, it doesn't stop. Like the Iranians are probably rebuilding covertly their nuclear facilities, and they have centrifuges out there somewhere, right? And so just because we're not looking, and just because social media has captured our attention so comprehensively and kind of shortened our attention spans and capacity to like think about long-term issues, it doesn't mean they're not happening. And that, again, that's the genius of Eddington, that it doesn't mean the data center is not getting built and that AI is not coming for your job, you know? And if you think social media was disruptive, wait till AI. You know?
I know.
And by the way, just one funny, I think I told you this, but it's worth sharing. In the screening I was at, you don't even have to see Eddington to think this is funny. It takes this kind of bizarre, dark, violent turn in the last third of the movie where there's like huge shootouts and kind of almost comical violence. And I don't think I'm, betraying any confidence that Bill Hader was at this screening. Uh-huh. And he was laughing in that like Bill Hader way so uproariously, which was funny because like people are getting like massacred, but it's like Barry, if anybody watched Barry, like
I laughed through it. I went to a premiere with my brother, and the two of us were laughing through most of the movie, and some people weren't, and I think they were like taking some, like they didn't get the joke, but it was like skewering everything about our society right now.
Yeah.
So you and I have joked and complained, I think as recently as this morning, about the tendency of a lot of Democrats to call everything Trump does a distraction.
Yes.
And you get to something in your piece that I think is underappreciated, which is that whatever Trump's intentions may be, to distract or not to distract, we are an easily distracted country, and our phones and feeds have made that even harder to focus on anything that he does for more than a few days. And like, I don't want to blame everything on technology, but I do feel like Trump or no Trump, I don't know how any society maintains a functional democracy in this information environment. It does feel to me like if we don't solve that, it doesn't matter if we get rid of Trump or not, like we're always going to have this problem.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the point I make right in the piece is that like Trump is the ultimate short-term guy, right? He wants the next news cycle. He wants to dominate that news cycle. And it's not about distraction. It's things he's doing. It's being the center of attention. It's kind of commanding the conversation. And Democrats are stuck in this trap where we have to respond to what Trump does, and we should. But that means that we're not kind of putting forward any kind of long-term vision. But like to answer your very smart point with like a story of my own, I remember I was at, I'll admit, one of these kind of conferences where different people are brought in and meant to talk about different things, and they had a dinner, and we were talking about AI, and I said, hey, I think, and this is like 2-3 years ago, I was like, I think we're underestimating how disruptive this is going to be. This is going to make it, it's going to disrupt our economy. It's going to create these new security challenges with deep fakes and all these things. And this other guy chimes in, and he's like, you know what? That's not true. People said the same thing about the internet, and the internet didn't destroy our democracy. Like, we were able to absorb that. And everybody kind of went on as if that was true. And later in the dinner, I was like, can I just go back to like something that guy said? Because actually, I think the internet did destroy our democracy. But what's interesting about it is, I think particularly listeners of Offline can accept the fact that the internet has kind of fundamentally broken something in our democracy. It's, social media algorithms have sorted us into these fractured realities. The traditional media that offers context has been destroyed, all the rest of that. But because it didn't happen like overnight, it's like that guy, like we don't think of that as having happened. It took like a decade for the internet to break American democracy, but it did. And I think this is the challenge for us, and it's going to get even harder with AI, because these things don't happen on our short time attention spans. We don't notice. I mean, this is, the cliche would be the frog boiling.
Yeah.
Like, we don't notice that the democracy has been destroyed until after it's been destroyed. And now we're like looking up and we're like, how did we get here? Well, we got here in large, it's impossible to, like, after my last book was about the rise of authoritarianism. And I remember I sent it to our old boss, Barack Obama. And he read the book, and it's about the basically the authoritarian playbook in Hungary and Russia and the U.S. and China. And he's like, and I was like, what do you think? He's like, well, it's pretty dark, And I was like, well, it's pretty dark out there. And he goes, I want you to think about something. I want you to think about what's different now. There's always been a competition between democracy and autocracy. There's always been nationalism, the forces you talk about. As you kind of do your revision, think about what's different. And what I realized is what's different is the internet and social media. And without the internet and social media, there is no Donald Trump. There is no capacity for Vladimir Putin to just kind of completely dominate the information space in Russia the way that he does. There's no capacity for this playbook where you use the tools of the internet either for surveillance purposes or for just kind of demoralization and dehumanization purposes or trolling purposes, right? And that's the new factor that tipped the scales in the direction of authoritarians. It gave them this tool that they didn't have. I often think about the fact that more people thought Barack Obama was born outside of the United States at the end of the Obama administration than the beginning. Well, why is that? That's not just because the Republicans are crazy. That's because they had the internet where you could mainline these conspiracy theories. And so I think we have to come to terms before we can fix democracy with the fact that it's technology that broke it.
I think it's especially hard for us to realize this because I think there's a human tendency to not want to believe that technology or our information environment is affecting us in a way that it's like we like to think that propaganda works on other people, that it doesn't work on us. And I kind of think there was an emphasis for a while in the first Trump era about misinformation, and the theory was, okay, a bunch of right wingers or people who are vulnerable to this, and there's a tendency to think, oh, not smart people, they'd go on the internet, they'd find conspiracies, and then these dummies would buy the conspiracies, and we just got to fix the misinformation. But it's not just about, misinformation is a huge part of it, and we don't have shared reality anymore, but it's also like, it is changing our brains.
Yeah.
And like every one of us is vulnerable to this. And we don't like to admit it. We don't like to see it, but our attention spans, we're more distractible. We can't focus on things. And I do think it's just become it's a more invisible force for people to say, oh yeah, this feed that I'm going on every day, it's just about other people that it's screwing up. It's not about me.
Yeah, I think we have a problem as human beings in that we equate technology with progress, right? So we see new innovations as inherently like a progressive force, not like a politically progressive, but like we're making progress as a species because we invented this new technology, whether it's the internet or the phone or AI, right? And we don't consider the ways in which technology might actually not be progress, right? That's the first point. Like, so we miss that. I think you're dead on in the sense that I remember talking for my last book to Maria Ressa, someone, I know we've talked about as potential offline guest, but she has this whole presentation about we have not considered the manner in which our brains as a species have literally been reprogrammed in the last decade by the internet and phones, that if you are staring at a device enough, if you're consuming information in such a different way than human beings have consumed information for thousands of years, inevitably you're actually kind of reprogramming yourself to have that shorter attention span, to seek that dopamine, to sort into tribes, to dehumanize the people you disagree with, all these different ways in which these technologies are changing us. And the last thing I'd say that makes you fully appreciate this, Jon, and I know I'm curious your experience of this, having kids really drives this home, because my kids are 8 and 10, wonderful, smart, good people. And it's scary when you see when they're on the iPad for too long, they literally change, they
become irritable.
They become irritable. They become anxious. When you take it away from them, they're kind of out of sorts for like an hour, and it's like watching an experiment, that, and they're less able to, do a puzzle or play a board game. And so, in all these different ways, we have all this information, all this evidence now that this is not progress, not for individuals, not for children, and certainly not for the body politic. And yet we've done nothing to meaningfully put guardrails around this, or to think about the ways in which, hey, we can't fix our democracy, HR 1, right? Like, sure, I'd like to see additional voting rights protections, but for some reason we don't think about like regulation of social media as part of fixing democracy. We see it as kind of a tech issue, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, it's both a societal, political, economic, it's connected to everything.
More of my conversation with Ben Rhodes after this break, but first, 2 quick housekeeping notes. America's labor fight began long before Starbucks and Amazon and was a lot more violent. In Season 2 of Shadow Kingdom: Coal Survivor, host Niccolo Mainoni looks back at one of the most infamous and gruesome labor crimes in American history and the band of kids who took over the country's richest union and transformed America. With exclusive home tapes, original reporting, and firsthand interviews with those who lived it, this season reveals how a union meant to protect workers became their greatest threat. Listen to the trailer now on the Shadow Kingdom feed, and tune into the premiere on August 25th wherever you get your podcasts. Or, better yet, Friends of the Pod subscribers can listen to the full season of Shadow Kingdom on the 25th. Join Friends of the Pod at crooked.com/friends, or subscribe through the Shadow Kingdom Apple feed. Also, in case you missed it, Crooked subscription content is now available on Substack. If you're already a subscriber, don't worry, this won't change anything for you. But if you love using Substack and prefer accessing things there, you can now find Crooked's content on Substack. When you subscribe, you'll unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite Crooked shows like this one, plus exclusive content like Polar Coaster with Dan Pfeiffer for expert insights into the polls and media, and more perks. It's one more way to stay up to date on internet culture insanity and the latest developments in AI. We're everywhere you are, so you can subscribe on the platform that works best for you. Visit crooked.com/friends to learn more. Offline is brought to you by OneSkin. Have you heard about OneSkin's scalp serum, OS1 Hair? People are raving about it. If you're familiar with OneSkin, you know about their patented OS1 peptide and how it's scientifically proven to target aging at the cellular level. It's what powers their skin and sun care. Now it's targeting age-related hair loss and thinning. Listen to this. People are sending in reviews like, my hair has never felt this thick and full, and my scalp feels healthier than ever. And I started 3 months ago, and I'm seeing new little hairs on my scalp line.
You were just saying that.
Yeah, it was. One customer even wrote, I have tried everything for hair growth, and finally, I'm getting a response from my hair. And it's not just talk. OneSkin scientists did a clinical study showing that after 6 months, participants had significantly thicker and denser hair. If you're ready to give OS1 Hair a try, you can get 15% off your first 3-month supply with code OFFLINE at oneskin.co. I haven't used the scalp serum yet, but I've definitely used the face lotion. Anyway, we love OneSkin here.
We love it here.
Yeah, you know?
Yeah, it's great.
Now I used to just barely wash my face, even with soap.
Really?
just
terrible.
Just splash some water on it. Now I use OneSkin.
You got to use it.
OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. For a limited time, you can try OneSkin with 15% off using code OFFLINE at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code OFFLINE. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Offline is brought to you by Naked Wines. You need Naked Wines.
You need them.
Naked is a wine club that directly connects you to the world's best independent winemakers, so you can get world-class wine delivered straight to your door. Use our code OFFLINE and the password at nakedwines.com and get 6 bottles for just $39.99.
Wow, that's a good deal. Good deal.
So we've all got some wines from Naked Wines.
Yeah.
And you just say what kind of wine's your favorite. So I'm a Sauvignon Blanc guy.
Yeah, that's how I got Sauvignon Blanc too.
Yeah, I think you weren't here, so we just
said about
for all of us.
I don't really know much about wine. I know there's white and there's red.
That was me, and now I at least know there's Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, and I don't like Chardonnay. I do like Sauvignon Blanc. And let me tell you, the 6 bottles that I got from Naked Wines, 5 out of 6, I want to go buy again.
Huh.
It was fantastic. It was great. How do they do it? Naked brings you amazing wines straight from the winery at up to 60% less than what you would pay in store. By cutting out extra costs like middleman markups, winemakers can pass those savings on to you without skimping on quality. Now is the time to join the Naked Wines community. Head to nakedwines.com/offline, click enter voucher, and put in my code OFFLINE for both the code and password for 6 bottles of wine for just $39.99 with shipping included. That's $100 off your first 6 bottles at nakedwines.com/offline and use the code and password OFFLINE for 6 bottles of wine for $39.99. Some people on the left have decided to make getting the phones out of the classrooms and banning the phones like it's a right-wing issue. And like kids need the phones, and you need it in case the darkest thing is like the kids need the phones in case there's a school shooting, which is like, is the phone going to help in that situation? Like no, and a lot of police officers, law enforcement will say no, it's actually harmful to have a bunch of people calling at that time. Yeah. But also like it's a tough one too. I mean, my view on this with my kids is it's impossible to just get the screens away from them. Yeah. Right? Like that's not plausible. I try to watch with them, so I'm talking about what we're watching together, and it's why I've been fucking building I don't know how many Lego sets with Charlie, because I'm like, okay, if we're building Legos together, then he's not watching the screen, and we can talk while we do that. It's just like it's really, but I also feel like I'm just sort of, I'm like treading water on this because at some point, I mean, you know. Your kids are a little older. Like at some point, I'm just going to have to let go, and they're going to have their screens.
Yeah, this is something I'm curious your take on, because I was thinking about this in doing my own research, right? But you're right. Like it's a losing battle ultimately, because guess what? Their friends have screens. So even if you had like a no screen policy, they're going to go to their friend's house, and then they're mad because their friend is playing some video game and they want to play it and all these things. So it's more about a management issue. But I've seen in the research that at least, and I've tried to explain to them the difference, like the value of story, right? Like as part of what the information that they're consuming, and the same thing with us, it's lost story. You know, like if you are looking at a post, if you're looking at a tweet, if you're looking at even a short YouTube clip, that's not using that muscle in your brain of digesting a story. And actually, if you were to extrapolate out from that to the broader, national identity, and I mentioned this in the Times piece I wrote, we have no shared national story anymore. I remember growing up, there was a pretty clear story about America, and not just about history, but about like where we were. Like we were for these values, like we were for freedom and open societies and democracy, and we had a villain. It was the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was for communism and autocracy and these bad things. And look, it was obviously like any story, had some truth, but some we weren't always the good guys, and the Soviets weren't all bad. But actually, it helped impose a values construction where I had something in common with somebody from West Virginia, right? Like we watched Rocky IV and we felt the same emotion, like we were participants in the same story. Mm-hmm. And the Cold War was really fundamental to that story. And I kind of have one theory of everything, that when we lost that story, like we kind of turned into like fighting each other. The enemy certainly to the right wing in this country, the enemy became the enemy within instead of, for a little minute there, it was the terrorist overseas. But then we got bored with that because we weren't winning those wars. And so the enemy in the war on terror almost became you and me and libs and immigrants and George Soros and all these other villains on the right. But I think technology has deprived us of any sense of a shared national story. And if you don't have a shared national story, I mean, a lot of the policies that, guys like you and I like that are going away, like research and higher education and USAID, these were all Cold War constructions. Civil rights was a Cold War policy. I mean, let's face it, it was not just the moral authority of that. What even Martin Luther King understood, and the appeal he made to Kennedy was, how are we going to win the Cold War if we're hypocrites and we're saying we're for freedom abroad and we're against it here? And I think part of the reason why it's so easy for Trump to dismantle all of these things is because there's no buy-in to a long-term national story.
Well, and what he's targeting, universities, science, these are all institutions that try to discover and amplify the truth.
Yeah.
Right. And he doesn't want a shared truth.
Yeah.
Right. Like authoritarians don't want a shared truth.
It's threatening.
That's threatening to them. So that's why they have to. Do you have thoughts on, because I think about this all the time. When we were in the White House, first couple of years, social media was going to help democratic movements all over the world. Arab Spring, I'm thinking of, and also in Iran, right? And we were like excited that Twitter and other platforms like that were going to help bring down authoritarians. How did it go from that to becoming a tool for authoritarians to suppress, confuse, divide their publics?
So I have a very specific answer to that, and it comes from my national security perspective. And I kind of really spent some time on in my last book too, but essentially the high water mark, I think, for social media was 2008 to 2011, right? So 2008, Obama gets elected, and it's in part because of the social media 1.0, right? Facebook as essentially a connector, right? Like our organizers can use it to like meet up with each other essentially.
Yeah.
And then what you saw is this tremendous momentum into the Arab Spring, where social media is suddenly being used not just to organize people, but to broadcast protests, to get the eyes of the world on Tahrir Square in Egypt, right? To hold dictators to account. So if there's an effort to kind of quash the protests, the whole world sees it and the world is outraged and other citizens are outraged and the crowds grow in the streets. And you start dictators starting to fall, like Mubarak in Egypt, but others in the Arab world. And I honestly think that in 2011, at the height of the Arab Spring, that the autocrats were like, we can't let this happen. We got to figure out how to make this tool work for us.
Because we can't just shut it down.
We can't just shut it down, right? And there, I think you see a very concerted effort with Vladimir Putin at the vanguard in Russia and the Chinese Communist Party doing their own flavor of this in Beijing, essentially saying, we got to get our arms around this thing. And so all of a sudden, the Chinese had already built what was called the Great Firewall, where they kind of walled off the internet in China. But they're like, wait a second, maybe we want people to be on platforms because then we can monitor everything they do, right?
Yeah.
And so the Chinese kind of pioneer this form of mass surveillance where they're like, we're going to basically kind of make it known that we're going to see every post. And this is our tool of actually thought control because you better, if you're thinking and self-censoring about what you might say on social media, you're beginning to change how you think, right? Because you're just certain places you don't go, right? But then what Putin starts to do is he's like, wait a second, this is the perfect tool of disinformation. And I think what Putin was the first to figure out, but right-wingers in this country and other places soon after found out, is that these algorithms are manipulatable because if I flood content, I can manipulate the algorithm to thinking that content is more important. And when this really struck me was in 2014 or 15, there was a plane that was shot down over Ukraine, right? So the Russians had already kind of had their Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. They had moved some, quote, military advisors in there, and a Dutch plane was flying over Ukraine. It was MH17, I remember, and it got shot down. And it was very clear that the Russians did this, or the Russian bad guys, because it was right above the area where they were operating. But the Russians had so many bots creating so much information on every platform that if you searched on Google, like forget Twitter, if you searched on Google MH17, all these theories came up. The Ukrainians shot it down. It didn't actually crash. Like, it didn't matter that it would be one theory. It just had to be a flood, right? And I realized at that point, like, shit, since the Arab Spring height, these guys have figured out how to use these platforms to surveil people, to monitor people, but also to flood them with their content, to divide people, to just create uncertainty, to create a sense of chaos. And I think that was it. I think 2011 was a hinge point. And ever since then, the business model of these companies, which is more clicks equals more ad revenue, was seen as just the opportunity that it is by the far right or by the autocrats, that if we can just generate more content, we can both manipulate these algorithms to have our content front and center, and we can also kind of divide, demoralize small D Democrats everywhere.
And distract people with all the information, and they're all just like having a good time on their feeds. I mean, you just talking about China versus Russia on this is, it reminds me of like 1984 versus Brave New World, right?
Yeah.
That 1984 is command, control, surveillance. That's how we're going to control public opinion. And Brave New World is like, oh, well, it's just going to be people being distracted, doing their own thing, enjoying like the hollowness of life.
I had coffee with a journalist in DC, like right after the Obama years. And we were talking about the Russian interference. You know, there was Russian interference in the election. And I was, saying, like, I realized, shit, like they're doing this and this is their playbook, and that they're, meant to demoralize people. And then I was like, and I was getting all these death threats online, and there were these Russians threatening me. And he said, yeah, and probably a bunch of bots. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess those were some bots threatening me. And he's like, yeah, to demoralize you. And I was like, shit, that's true. That worked.
Yeah.
I mean, you know me, I put on this kind of brave face, but underneath it, I'm a softie, right? Like, I was sad, like, about the mean things people were saying. But I realized, having coffee with this guy, like, I've been sad probably because of non-human beings criticizing me online.
Well, and like, it doesn't even have to be bots at this point now, though.
Yeah.
Right? Because if some rando on Twitter who you don't know what their name is, they just have some random Twitter handle and they've got like 10 followers and they're going back and forth with you and they're saying mean things. They could be a real person and not even a bot. And you're just like, what? This has ruined my day?
Yeah.
This random person?
Yeah.
It's like we're all susceptible to it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all susceptible to it. And it affects us like emotionally and psychologically. And again, just to kind of connect it to where we started, like, this is what you're not doing is thinking. You're not thinking like, what are the best long-term policies for this country? What's the story that we can all get behind? What's not just like the tactic to win the next fight in the news cycle or the next online fight? What's the vision that people are going to get behind, right? It traps you in this loop of caring about things that, when you really think about it, are not that important, right? Like, the outcome of the Twitter fight is not that important. The news cycle is less important than climate change or AI. The fact that Trump, like, even from our perspective, or ours being the left, like, the fact that he walked funny across the red carpet is not really as important as, him validating Russia's annexation of Ukraine. Like we just get so focused on these small things that we don't think about big things.
I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm like, I almost need like one document that is a story of what has happened since Trump took office again.
Yeah.
And if you were to write that story, like for history, so that people can understand what the big things were, what would you put in there and what wouldn't you? And like, I don't know that I'd put the Epstein files in there, even though we've talked about it was probably one of the longest running stories. But like, compared to what's happening with ICE raids and rounding up immigrants and the tariffs and everything else, like these things that are going to have huge effects on millions of people, you're like, oh, that actually helps you weed out, but we don't have big stories anymore. Like
yeah. I mean, if you think about it in 10 years or 20 years, right? The complete failure and refusal to regulate AI in any way, shape, or form is going to have mattered. And like Biden was building regulations, certainly on how it moves out in the world, but also how it's used here. Those have all been lifted, right? That's why those guys were at the inauguration. That's why Sam Altman announced like what $500 billion in maybe not real investment in the U.S., but whatever. We've dismantled any climate action in this country, right? No regulation, literally a finding that greenhouse gases don't pose a threat to public health, right? That's going to matter, right? USAID, which seemed like this kind of like, wow, we could look up in 20 years and maybe tens of millions of people would have died. So if you just value human life, that's a big story. But then, you get into like the big, beautiful bill and even, there's the Medicaid cuts and the cuts to nutrition assistance, which are going to be profound. There's also just, we may be looking up in 20 years and the entire global trading system is geared towards China because they're a predictable trading partner and we're not. And the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency, which means Americans cannot afford to borrow. I mean, America is running a credit card. That's how we pay for things. Like we spend more money and I'm not just talking about the deficit, I'm talking about individual Americans' ability to afford goods at the prices that we pay that we already think are too high are because of the dollar being the reserve currency. Like if that could go away and suddenly it's, I don't know if it's the RMB or the euro or the Swiss franc or the yen, some amalgam of them. But these are the structural things, the climate, technology, the lives of people through USAID, the way the global economy works. You're like, it's those, never mind what's happening here at home, like whether we have a democracy at all, and that's where ICE raids and having a kind of SS type ICE police force here, like those are tectonic shifts that are happening. And yet we kind of consume them as, these short-term, news cycle things that we engage with,
This brings me to like another concern I have, which is I worry that the politics of short-termism are more attractive and they're easier than trying to get people to care about a future that they cannot yet see. And so even if you take the technology out of it, this is the climate change, the debt and deficits, AI now, even in sort of a more short-term context, the Medicaid cuts from the big, beautiful bill, they cynically push them out until after the election.
Yes.
So it's like harder for Democrats to run on. And, we've been on campaigns and we've seen polls. And every time you ask people to try to sacrifice now or think about the future, that's always a bigger loser than we're going to elect me and I'll immediately give you a tax cut or a rebate or, I don't know, we passed the Affordable Care Act and it wasn't popular for 3 or 4 years because it took that long to get it together and implement it, And so I do wonder how Democrats and just the larger opposition to Trump sort of counter people's instincts to not want to think long term or at least to say they want to think long term, but not really vote like they want to think long term. Like it feels like a hack that Donald Trump and his movement have really figured out.
It is a hack, and I don't claim to have the answers to this, and I really struggled, to suggest some answers. The answers I suggested, first of all, it was easier to get people to think long-term again when you had like a long-term proposition like the Cold War, right? So Kennedy, the era I was like, what the era that the Republicans are currently undoing is still the Kennedy-Johnson era, right? Because that's when you created, you had civil rights, you had Medicaid, Medicare, but also the space program, you had USAID, you had the Peace Corps. These are all long-term investments that were somehow tied back to the Cold War. It helped that you had a very charismatic young leader who presented it. And this I do think applies today. Kennedy sold it and Johnson passed a lot of it, right? But in selling it, one thing Kennedy did do is he brought everybody. It was not just government. It was like a mission that the whole society needed to participate in. We need universities at the table. We need business and labor to figure out, how to do this in the economy. We need the best researchers and scientists from around the world to come do this with us. Like we need culture, right? That's why there's a Kennedy Center, right? But like, I do think Democrats have kind of narrowly become a party of Washington, and they're not kind of wrapping their arms around allies who have interests, universities, businesses, they actually do think somewhat longer term, right? And so by enlisting allies who are not just, and this is what, like, I criticized Biden, where like even the things I liked that he passed, it was like the parts were like more than the sum.
Yeah.
There was no vision communicated. There was no sense of national or societal mission. Even when they tried in the context of a campaign to sell it, they called it Bidenomics.
Right.
Like, like talk about an exclusionary story. Like, so let's put aside the kind of vanity involved in that. Anyway, so I do think you need to kind of make it feel like it's not just a Washington game. And Trump does this too, by the way. Like, he's got different people at the White House every day. Like, I think we need to get back to like, big national goals that we're enlisting, other people in, and not just that we're passing bills in Washington, right?
But I also think, I mean, you just said it, like, I think we need charismatic leaders.
Yeah.
And I realize that, we are not in an information environment anymore where like a charismatic leader giving a big speech is even going to get through to a lot of people. And I know there's always this debate about, is it the movement or is it the leader? Like, what's more important? And, there's a lot of no one's coming to save us and we all got to do it ourselves and we got to work together. And I totally believe that. But I do think that technology and the information environment have made actually having a charismatic leader who can break through so much more important than it ever has been.
Yeah. And first of all, I think that's right. I think the leader has to be younger too, because you can't be future oriented with like Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer. And no, this is not me even rehashing that. They could be different people with different names, but I just think you need younger people. I highlighted Zohran Mamdani in my piece. And again, I'm not trying to wade into some center-left fight. What I am saying is like, let's just kind of look at what this guy's done that's interesting, right? He's broken through, right? He's young, he's different, he's doing politics in a different way. I think there's something also that's important for Democrats to think about, which is particularly when we're trying to come up with ideas. You and I talk about this all the time. We skip ahead to debating like the final points of the bill we would pass through Congress.
Yeah.
Like
10 debates on the finer points of Medicare for all.
Yeah. Medicare for all or housing policy. And not just like, what are the goals? Like, what are we trying to do here? So what a charismatic leader can do is articulate what the big goal is. Like, what is the priority? Like, what do we want people to think about when they think about our party, But then I think the other thing about Mamdani that's interesting is I think cities, are increasingly going to be these laboratories for trying out policies that you scale, and policies for how you deploy artificial intelligence, policies for how you have low-cost clean energy solutions, right? Policies for around affordability, right? So I'm not saying every idea he's proposed is right, but the point is, like, if you see something that can work, the Democrats should be getting ideas from outside of Washington. And like, hey, here's a story that we can tell about how this policy worked in this place, and we want to scale it up, Yeah. Because we try to kind of develop our policies in like think tanks and, in Congress. And I think that's the wrong place for them to originate, So I think you need younger, charismatic leaders. You need kind of this kind of whole society view of how to work for the future. And you need to kind of find solutions outside of Washington and try to like build out, like California state legislature, right? There's a lot of interesting fucking things. Our Buffy Wicks is done, on tech regulation, on energy, on housing, like make, Sacramento being a lab. That's a cool idea that, you can then try to grow those ideas.
Offline is brought to you by Acorns. Acorns helps you grow towards the money goals you have today and the ones you'll have tomorrow. Acorns is the financial wellness app that helps you invest for your future, save for tomorrow, and spend smarter today. Acorns makes it easy to start doing more with your money. In fact, you can start automatically investing with just your spare change. You don't need to be a finance whiz. Acorns puts your money into an expert-built portfolio to make sure you're investing wisely, not wildly. Plus, Acorns can support your money goals in life, a new car, a first home, investing for your kids, saving up for retirement, and so much more. Acorns even has a checking account that automatically invests for you, an emergency fund that grows your money. And it's all in one easy-to-use app. Very important to invest and plan financially. Wish we had Acorns when, I was just a kid out of college and didn't really think about putting any money away at all.
I didn't know anything about this stuff.
Me neither. Now Acorns can just pretty much do it for you. And it's super helpful. Sign up now and Acorns will boost your new account with a $5 bonus investment. Join the over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/offline or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 2 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/offline. Offline is brought to you by ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. We love ZBiotics.
Huge fans.
I have a ZBiotics story.
Oh, hit us with the jam.
We had the Crooked Summer Party.
Oh, yeah, we did.
A couple Fridays ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it started at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And did that for a couple hours.
Uh-huh.
Went to a bar afterwards to meet some people. Forgot my ZBiotics.
Oh, no.
And talk about a rough next morning. I had a rough next morning, a rough next afternoon, a rough next into the next night.
Yeah.
And I never have rough next days.
At our age, it's like, oh, today's Friday. You want me to have a rough Sunday? That's what you're talking about.
Never again. Never again will I forget ZBiotics.
That's why they say it.
ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. The final days of summer are here for you to enjoy. Whether you're heading to the beach, camping in the woods, or squeezing in one last vacation road trip, don't forget to bring ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink. Drink a pre-alcohol before drinking and enjoy every day of summer to the fullest. Go to zbiotics.com/offline to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use offline at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/offline and use the code offline at checkout for 15% off. You mentioned that Mamdani went out into the communities.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's almost it's a fusion of sort of old school organizing and meeting people and talking to people and campaigning with technology. The technology we have, not the technology not the platforms we wish we had, but what we have. And so it's like he's going out there, he's talking to people, but then he's showing that he's broadcasting that to everyone from his channels. And I do think that this is a problem with a lot of the older politicians, but it's not just their age. It's the idea that they grew up in politics at a time where you could be separate from the people that you're trying to get the votes from, and you could be behind the podium, and you could be looking like you're wearing your suit and you're all official and stuff like that.
And you run television commercials.
Right. And I think that, one thing even I think Trump did well in the first term is Trump being on Twitter all the time. It's he's communicating constantly. Mm. And now there's obviously bad parts of that, not just for the content of the tweets, but I think there is an expectation now by voters that if you're going to lead us, you have to be talking to us all the time about everything.
Yeah.
I think that hurt Joe Biden, right? I think it's hurt a lot of other Democrats too, who are great leaders, have great ideas. But if you're not out there talking about them in a way that is, authentic and can connect with people, then that's it. No one's going to listen to you.
It's game over. Yeah. Two things. I mean, the first is Viktor Orban, the autocratic right-wing CPAC darling leader of Hungary. He was
going to host the Trilat.
Yeah. Oh, shit. Yeah. That's a real home game for Zelensky, right? Yeah. He was actually the prime minister of Hungary. Maybe he'll actually, maybe Putin will install him in that other job. But he was the prime minister of Hungary once before, right? and then he, as a pretty conventional center-right guy. And then he was voted out in 2002. And he was in the wilderness for 8 years. And he did these things called civic circles, where he built a new party or a new identity for his party by going out, not just him, but organizers, and having these meetings in communities about identity. Like, what is Hungarian identity? What do you care about? What do you want this party to stand for? And he did it in churches. He did it in communities, very grassroots, bottom-up stuff. So that by the time he ran this populist campaign as a more populist right-wing autocrat type guy in 2010, there was this bottom-up buy-in. He'd been out in the communities, kind of listening and like I was saying, like developing a laboratory for his ideas. I think Democrats have to do something similar, where they're just getting out in communities, listening to people, communicating not from Washington but out in the country. But to your point, to give a specific example, again on Mamdani, did you see the video of him when he was still a nobody at the halal cart?
Yeah.
So Zohran Mamdani is at the halal cart, and he's trying to explain to New Yorkers why like chicken and rice costs over $10 or something, and it never should. Now, there are two things that are interesting about that. One is, I'm a New Yorker by birth. I'm there a lot. I'm struck by the fact that it's like $15 for like chicken and rice at the cart. And yeah, any New Yorker has been like, why the fuck is it so expensive? Right? But secondly, like he just explained it like this, right? Like in a very snappy way about where all these costs were coming from. And he had the visual of being at the halal cart with some guy who runs the cart. And I was like, and this, again, no offense, because I did these conference calls when I was in the White House as the expert, but like that was 100 times like more impactful than like our friend Brian Deese as National Economic Council director doing like a press call to explain why supply chains had driven up costs.
And that's a great example because it's also not really an ideological example in that, you know, he's a democratic socialist, but it turns out that's it's an abundance type reason.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things he's like, he wants to make it easier to get permits and if you're running the halal card, and that's crazy. And so it's like, it doesn't even have to be an ideologically, you know, left or center left or whatever policy if you can just explain it like a normal fucking human being.
Yeah. So there he is. He looks like a normal guy. He's with a cart vendor who's a normal guy. He's using the new technologies, right? This is going to be on TikTok. It's going to be on Instagram. And he's explaining things to people in ways they can understand. And he's talking about things that anybody can understand. Like, why the fuck is the chicken and rice so expensive?
Yeah.
And there's policy solutions that flow from it, right? And that's the kind of story, that's like getting in the communities, finding the solutions in the communities, right? So his solutions are informed by, and this is something Democrats don't do a good job, you have to show that your solutions are informed by the conversations that you have. You did this very well with our old boss in 2008, and I learned a lot about speech writing from you. Much better to use a story that Obama learned on the campaign trail from, so when he's running for president, it was like, I met this person and she had these healthcare problems and her costs were like this, and I'm going to fix it like that. That's so much better than just saying like, we must fix healthcare and here's my 5-point plan. And then even when we were in the White House, you'll remember we used the letters that we got because he didn't get out there that much, but it was like, I got this letter the other day from this woman and she has these pre-existing conditions and therefore, you know, but like if you root it as Mamdani did or Obama in like a real world example that people can understand, and then the solutions flow from that. And by the way, they become long-term solutions, right? Because, you know, the solution to lowering the costs are usually fixing some structural things that will open up a long-term space, you know?
But you just gotta center people in this, because I think the whole, you know, interminable debate about like, should we be talking about democracy or not democracy? And like, people don't really care about democracy. It's because the language we use about it, people can't see themselves in it. They can't see how it affects their lives. Like, and I believe that having a functioning democracy like is very important to people's lives, but that means it's on us to describe why that's true.
It might even be simpler than that, John, in the sense that one thing Trump's done that we should copy is in our party, there's democracy issues, there's domestic policy issues, there's foreign policy issues, and they're all like siloed out, right? So we're either going to have a message on healthcare today, and then we're going to have a message on like voting rights, and then maybe we'll allow the foreign policy nerds to. Trump, it's all the same. It's all about identity and there's no kind of real difference between these deals he's doing over here or there. Like, we have to blow up these silos because all these things are connected, right?
Yeah.
Like we were saying earlier, like technology is connected to democracy, and look, our ability to solve problems is connected to democracy. So I think we have to just break down these walls between these different issues and just see them as, what's your vision? What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
Because like if you're trying to actually fix healthcare or energy in this country, you're going to have to get money the fuck out of politics.
Yep.
And so repealing, Citizens United is not about like good government. It's about like standing up to oil companies and special interests and all the things that were in the 2007 Obama stump speech, that works politically, right? And Chris Murphy does this and Ro Khanna does this, but like, so there are people doing this in the Democratic Party where it's like, let's just stop separating out these issues from each other.
Well, I'm thinking about what you said earlier, how everything sort of broke down when we stopped having a national story.
Yeah.
And so I got to end with the recent J.D. Vance speech at the Claremont Institute that both of us have become obsessed with, in part because, he basically makes the argument that being an American shouldn't be about believing in a set of ideals like the ones laid out in the Declaration of Independence, that we're all created equal, but being American should be about who your ancestors are and how long they've been here. And, I asked Pete Buttigieg about this on Pod Save America because I genuinely think that Democrats finding an answer to that argument, which is not just a J.D. Vance argument, but an argument of the new right, of the new nationalist right in this country, is going to lead us towards that sort of coherent vision for the future that you've talked about. Have you thought about like what that vision, what that larger American story might be updated for like where we are in 2025?
I mean, I don't claim to have the answer to this, but I'd offer again a couple of thoughts, suggestions. The first is like, we have to remind ourselves that as dominant as Trump is, this guy is not permanent. He's 79 years old. By the way, even if the absolute worst case scenarios happen, it's still not permanent, right? Like there will be another side to this thing, whether it's in 3 years or there's like a civil, even if literally the horrible things happen, there's still another side to it.
Yeah.
So you've got to be thinking about these things, right? To the J.D. Vance point, I think that, look, there's a meta answer and then there's more of a political answer. The meta answer is there's always been two stories fundamentally in America that go back to the founding. And you and I have talked about this a bit, but like J.D. Vance's story is actually not a new one, right? This is a country for certain people and they're white people. It's a white Christian nation, and other people can participate, but they kind of have to accept that's kind of the basis of how this works, and
the treatment of Native Americans, of Catholics, of early immigrants. It's all there.
It's all there. We've acted that story for most of our history, right? Then there's Barack Obama's story is the progressive story that runs all the way back to the founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin's view that the answer to what went wrong in the Constitution was the Constitution, the more perfect union answer. That the history of America, you can say that the Trump version of American exceptionalism is we are exceptional. We just are inherently exceptional. What we do is right. To J.D. Vance's point, I'm sure he could construct a narrative where we are the inheritors of Western supremacy. Yeah. I'm not even saying white supremacy. You could say that if you want, but more like Rome to Britain to us. Like we are
strong
the inheritors
leaders
of these traditions and of Christianity. And if we do it, it's right. And we are exceptional. And I truly think they believe that. The Obama story, which is the story of the Kennedy family and the Kings and FDR and the progressive movement and Frederick Douglass and Reconstruction and Lincoln and back to, I think, Benjamin Franklin, is the exceptionalism is the pursuit of the more perfect union and the pursuit of a multiracial composite nation, right? Where essentially we are enriched and stronger because basically we are the place that welcomes all strivers. And now, that's not a political message. I would argue, whatever the answer is, this future point has to come into it. Because their message is inherently about the past. It's about going back to something, make America great again. There was this time in the past that was better. You had a better status, or you had a more secure job, or, you know, some of it's race, but some of it is economics, right? Or some of it's societal. But people kind of sense that these guys want to roll the tape back. They don't have answers about the future, right? Democrats are better when we're the ones saying, this is a nation about the future. This is a nation that's going to win the future, to use one of our many campaign slogans, right? Yeah. But to make it more tangible, I think what everybody feels on left to right is that there are these forces kind of crushing our lives. And they're big, out of our control forces, you know, tech companies and oil companies. And if you're Trump, you know, the deep state, there's just this top-down pressure. And suddenly the future looks scarier than the past. And that's why Trump's winning the argument. The past looks safer than the future looks. And I think you need an infusion. I won't even say Obama because we're so partisan, but this is what John F. Kennedy came along and said, there's a new frontier. Like, we are going to go there. And I think, though, this one needs a little populism today. We are going to smash that power structure. We're not going around it. We're going through it. We're going to smash the grip that these people have in our lives. These, Bernie's term would be oligarchs, but it's more just like these, you know, the Brexit slogan was great, take back control, but that was a reactionary one. I actually think there's a take back control of the future. Like we are going to smash the forces that are suffocating us, and we are going to find the answers to why technology is going to work for us and we're not going to work for it, you know, for why we can have a clean energy transition that lowers cost for people instead of being trapped in these high energy costs in a fossil fuel economy, you know, that is, it kind of have a safety net that's not just about protecting these old programs, but we need a new safety net that works for the way in which people live and work in the 21st century, right? So I think the message has to be about both like breaking through these forces that are like crushing us, but reclaiming the idea that there's a new frontier, you know?
Well, it's also, how are we going to do those things? How are we going to get to that future?
Yeah.
We're not going to get there if we are isolated from the world, if we are isolated from each other, if we are at war with each other all the time, if we are divided all the time. Like, if we're just going to bitch and moan and yell at each other and dunk on each other and have all these fights, and like that's not going to be progress. Yeah. We're not going to get there. And by the way, like, for, you know, again, because you have to like appeal to people's self-interest, like, you might think that you are, you know, rich enough or well off enough or well educated enough to escape the consequences of the short-term thinking of the politics that Trump, but like, it's going to come for us all.
It's going to come for us all.
And if it's not, and it's going to come for our children.
Yeah.
And so if we don't find a way to live together, and in a country that was founded on the proposition that we are all created equal, and not on the proposition that you get a leg up in this society if your ancestors were here and fought in the fucking Civil War on the wrong side, then like, we have to get our shit together, and we have to be a pluralistic society, because when we have worked together in this country, that is when America has been at its best.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And you need to be able to live with some discomfort to get there, right? Because it doesn't just mean accommodating views you disagree with, but it means like standing for something in ways that can motivate people beyond those who already agree with you, you know? And Obama, and actually look, it's not a coincidence if you look at the last 50 years. Because I let's not count LBJ, because I'm not sure he would have gotten elected without a tragedy. And then you got Biden, which is kind of, that 2020 election is a weird one. I'm not sure he wins without COVID. You know, Kennedy, Carter, Clinton, Obama. These are young outsiders. You know, you need that young outsider coming in and making that case for the future, and making that case for we are going to care about things and stand for certain values, but not in an exclusionary way.
Right, and they were all anti-system.
Yeah.
In a way, they had elements of that. Reform, like, let's, you know, not as much as like smash the oligarchy, but there were elements of that.
They weren't scoldy to their opponents. They didn't say, before you can come on my team, I need you to admit that you're racist or you're this. They'd say, like, this country's so great, it's changed before and it can change again. Yeah. You know? And that simple idea, but frankly, we haven't tried it since 2008 in this party, you know?
Well, if we can get off our phones and our feeds, maybe we can do some long-term thinking about that. This was fun, man.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks for doing this. This is great.